For over 20 years, Formula One teams have lived under one iron law. Once qualifying ends, you do not touch the car. It does not matter if a hurricane rolls in overnight. Parc Ferme is Parc Ferme, but the FIA just quietly rewrote that rule for 2026. And the change, buried inside Article Bone 511, could transform how teams approach every wet race weekend from Melbourne onwards. Almost nobody is talking about it. The headlines have been dominated by the new cars, the new power units, Cadillac joining the grid. Meanwhile, the FIA published a 200-page sporting regulation document on February 27th, and tucked inside is a provision that overrides one of the most fundamental restrictions in the sport. So, let's read the regulation, break down what it means, and why Melbourne this week makes the timing almost too perfect. First, context. Parc Ferme in its current form dates back to 2003, when the FIA under Max Mosley froze car setups between qualifying and the race. Before that, wealthy teams like Ferrari and McLaren would build two different cars every weekend. One optimized for qualifying, stripped down, set up for one perfect lap. Then, overnight, mechanics would tear it apart and rebuild a completely different machine for the race. Different ride height, different wings, different suspension. It was an arms race. Only the richest teams could win. So in 2003, the FIA locked it down. The setup you qualify with is the setup you race. For 2 decades, that rule held firm. Sprint races created new complications, and the FIA split Parc Ferme into 2 windows for sprint weekends in 22-4. But the core principle never budged, which sounds perfectly reasonable, until the weather changes. And this is where things get ugly, because Parc Ferme has a body count of ruined races and dangerous incidents the sport would rather forget. Let's start with the one everyone remembers. Spa-Francorchamps, August 2021. Qualifying happened Saturday in normal conditions. Then Sunday, the rain came, and it did not stop. The cars went out behind the safety car in conditions so bad, multiple drivers said they could not see the car in front. Visibility was 0. Water pooled on the racing line in sheets. George Russell said afterward, it was the most dangerous conditions he had ever driven in. The race was red flagged, restarted, red flagged again. The field completed just 2 laps behind the safety car. No green flag racing at all, but because 2 laps were completed, the FIA awarded half points. Max Verstappen won a Grand Prix without actually racing. Fans who paid hundreds of dollars watched cars circulate behind a safety car for 12 minutes. It was a farce. And one core reason it played out that way is that every car was locked into a dry weather setup. Ride heights slammed low, wing angles trimmed for Spa's long straights. In those conditions, the cars were essentially undrivable. Rewind to Interlagos, November 2016. Qualifying happened dry. Race day brought a monsoon. Cars were aquaplaning at over 200 km/h through the Senna S curves. Multiple drivers spun. Kimi Raikkonen crashed. The race was red flagged twice. In the middle of that chaos, a 20-year-old Max Verstappen put on what many still consider the greatest wet weather drive in modern F1 history. 16th to 3rd, making passes that should not have been physically possible. But here is the part that rarely gets mentioned. Every car was fighting against its own setup, locked into dry weather configurations. Lower ride heights, trimmed wings, stiffer suspension in a monsoon. The cars that crashed were not necessarily driven badly. They were set up for conditions that no longer existed. The sport has a long, painful history of weather turning finely tuned F1 cars into something genuinely dangerous. Japan 2014, where Jules Bianchi suffered a fatal accident in rain-soaked conditions at Suzuka. And through all of it, Parc Ferme said you cannot change the setup. Now, there was a tiny exception in the old regulations. Article 34.1 included a provision for a change in climatic conditions. If the FIA technical delegate judged the weather warranted it, teams could modify brake ducts, radiator ducts, and PTO tubes. That was it. 3 components, nothing to do with ride height or wings, nothing that would actually change how the car behaved in rain. The provision was widely regarded as useless. It addressed ventilation and cooling while completely ignoring the aerodynamic and mechanical changes that actually matter when water is on the track. Until now. If the official weather service predicts that the probability of precipitation is greater than 40% at some point during the sprint or the race at a competition, or at the sole discretion of the race director, a rain hazard may be declared. Let's unpack that. First, the trigger. 40% precipitation probability from the official weather service designated for that event. A specific objective threshold. Second, the override. The race director has sole discretion to declare rain hazard regardless of what the forecast says. If they look at the sky 2 hours before qualifying and decide rain is coming, they can pull the trigger even at 30%. Third, the timing. The rain hazard must be declared no later than 2 hours before qualifying begins. Teams get advance notice, meaning they can plan their qualifying approach knowing they will have the opportunity to convert the car afterward. Once rain hazard is declared, teams can make modifications listed in FIA document Doc 080. That document is not publicly available, but reporting from motorsport.com indicates the permitted changes are limited to 2 things: ride height adjustments and wing incidence angle modifications. If you are a casual fan, those might sound like minor tweaks. They are not for these cars. Those 2 parameters might be the difference between a car that handles in the rain and a car that tries to kill its driver. Here is why. Current F1 cars, and the 2026 cars even more so, generate enormous downforce through their floors. The sculpted Venturi tunnels underneath accelerate air to create a low-pressure zone that sucks the car onto the track. This ground effect can generate over 1,000 kilograms of load, but it depends critically on the gap between floor and road surface. In dry conditions, teams want that gap as small as possible. Millimeters matter. The closer the floor to the track, the more downforce. But in standing water, a low-riding floor becomes a hydroplane. Water gets drawn under the car, forms a continuous film, and the entire underbody lifts off. The driver does not slowly lose grip. They lose it all at once, instantly. No warning, no progressive slide, just sudden, complete disconnection from the track. Raising ride height creates clearance that lets water pass underneath without forming that hydrodynamic film. Crude, but effective for a life-threatening problem. The catch is that raising ride height destroys your ground effect downforce. You might lose hundreds of kilograms of load, which is why wing angle adjustment matters just as much. By increasing the angle of attack on front and rear wings, teams can claw back lost downforce through aerodynamic loading from above. If you're finding this breakdown useful, hit subscribe. I cover F1 regulations and technical analysis every week, and this season we'll have more hidden rule changes than any in recent memory. Now, here is what teams still cannot change under rain hazard: spring rates, damper settings, differential maps, brake duct sizing, tire pressures all remain locked even when rain hazard is declared. A full dry to wet conversion touching every parameter would take 1 to 2 hours and make Parc Ferme meaningless. The FIA specifically chose changes that are cost-neutral while addressing the most dangerous aspect of wet running for ground effect cars. It is a calculated compromise. The Bureau of Meteorology flagged life-threatening conditions, with some areas recording 100 mm of rain in 6 hours. Thousands of homes lost power. Rivers overflowed. Emergency services responded to over 70 flood-related incidents. But here is the twist. The Australian Grand Prix weekend runs March 5th through 8th, and multiple weather services project a completely dry, warm weekend. 24 degrees, sunshine, 0 precipitation.